Why does the church reflect the polarization of the culture at large? What's the future of Christian higher education, of theological education in specific? Why is formal theological education sometimes seen as irrelevant by the church? We'll answer these questions and a whole lot more with our special guest, our new Talbot Dean, Dr. Ed Stetzer. I'm your host, Scott Ray.
And I'm your co-host, Sean McDowell.
And this is Think Biblically from Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. Ed, thank you so much for being with us, and welcome to the Talbot family, taking over as the new Dean of Talbot School of Theology. We're so delighted to have you with us, not only on this podcast, but at Talbot in general.
Well, looking forward to being here and moving here. July 1, 2023 begins, and looking forward to a journey together with you and lots of our other amazing faculty and staff.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fun coming. Yeah, it's going to be great. So help our listeners get to know you a little bit.
I just love how you introduce the state of the culture, the state of theological education. All of this is going to be addressed in the next few minutes.
Yes, we are.
So we're going to cover it all.
Yes, we are.
I appreciate the bold way that Talbot School of Theology.
In the next 45 minutes.
Exactly. Cover it all.
So help our viewers get to know you a little bit better. What are some of the things that you are most passionate about? You know, those things that keep you up at night and get you up in the morning.
So I would say that I'm very driven by helping God's people join Jesus on mission in the world. That's partly because I'm a missiologist, so I actually pursued that as a formal area of training. But also, I think we live in a very convulsive time. We're in the midst of a cultural convulsion. Turbulence and tumult is the reality of our day. And I think the answer is for Christians to stand out, step out in faith, show and share the love of Jesus in the midst of a broken and hurting world. So I'm very driven by that ministry-wise. I would say that, I'm the father of three amazing daughters, and that gives. And when you're the father of three amazing daughters, sometimes that keeps you up at night. So Donna and I have been married we got married at 20. We're just kids. Don't tell our daughters we got married at 20. So those are so much. They're the joy of my life. I love the local church. Ephesians 3:10 says God has chosen the church to make known His manifold wisdom, and look forward to even serving here in my local church as well. So those are things that drive me, that I'm passionate about. Now,
let me just follow up on that briefly. Two of your daughters going to school here in Southern California.
Yes, that's true.
One's at Biola.
Well, so the one at Biola has a funny story. So there are, of course, I have three. One's finishing up her master's degree at the University of Toronto in vocal performance. And that she's the oldest. The youngest, the middle one's at Cal Baptist over in Riverside, and the youngest one, we're very close. Youngest daughter, very close to her. But she sat me down, I don't even know, maybe 6-7 months ago, maybe longer, and to me and Donna, and said, I really love you guys, but Dad, you're at Wheaton and you've got an unusual last name, and everyone would sort of know that I'm your daughter, so I'm going to go to Biola. And so then a few months ago, I sat her down and said, "Hey, we're coming too." So,
and her response?
She has warmed to the idea since that initial response. But we're the ultimate helicopter parents, I guess. But in our world, leading Christian colleges and universities, there's a handful, and certainly Biola is one of them. And I've known and appreciated Barry for years. We've been friends for years, and so I had to remind her too that. She's probably there are a bunch of other universities as well, but Biola is uniquely positioned, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it, and she has warmed to the idea.
I'm glad to hear that.
Being a McDowell, I have serious sympathy for
I
your
imagine
daughter.
That's a good point. It's a good point.
I get it. I'm like, you can't escape from this last name. But that actually brings me to what I wanted to.
And you went to the field, though. You went into the same field.
I did. That's a whole nother story. We could talk about that at a different time. But I'm curious how you navigate having such a visible platform, because I've seen this with my father growing up. Yeah. I have a decent platform today, live in that world. Mm-hmm. Your Twitter following, you're speaking. You've got a big platform. How do you navigate that as a Christian leader, especially because we've seen a lot of Christian leaders fail publicly? Yeah. What are some of the downsides of that, maybe?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to stewardship. How do you steward your the place that God has put you? And so I want to steward well what, if any influence that I have, I want to steward well that influence. So part of that is how you think about it. And also, I don't think that I'm entitled or somehow special in this sense. I think it has to do with the fact probably that I entered a field that people, about 3 years after I entered the field or graduated, people all of a sudden were very interested in mission, like missional and mission things. And so I got to be a voice in some of that space about joining, the church joining Jesus on mission in the world. I would say that that there are challenges with that. We're, again, partly because we're living in a very divided time. People are mad all the time. And I would say, you just got to get used to, you see the same thing. There are, consistently just people who are unhappy with you. But at the end of the day, I want to get up and I want to work for an audience of one. I want to please the Lord.
Amen.
I want to be faithful to the Scriptures. I want to help Christians live on mission. But I also recognize that there's really very few things you can say that people won't get upset about. So, I used to recycle tweets. You have some sort of pithy tweet that you put out 5 years ago and you put it out again. And 5 years ago, everyone was like, amen. And now it's like, well, actually, and it's sort of
interesting.
People are just, and I occasionally retweet my haters, just to point out that, I would say Christian leaders are going to have to get used to the fact that they're going to be, if they're going to be faithful, even just faithful biblically, you're going to be a villain in some people's stories. And the question is, who in whose story are going to be that villain? And again, for me, I want to work as an audience of one, faithful to the Scriptures, helping Christians live on mission.
Well said.
So, Ed, as a missiologist, and have the heart that you have for global missions and connecting the people of God to the mission of God in the world, what would you say are some of the major hurdles that are out there to the church continuing to fulfill the Great Commission?
Yeah, I think there are, and it depends on where you are. So in the English-speaking Western world, last few months I've spent a month in Australia, I've been over in the UK, of course here in the US and Canada. I think in the English-speaking Western world there are challenges in the culture to being faithful. And I think Christians are a little unsure now that they've found themselves on the other side of the cultural divide. In other words, what we hold to be true, what we hold to be scriptural, the world might seem as small-minded or intolerant. And I think Christians aren't used to being in that space. And it's happened over the last few decades. We've lost our home field advantage. And so I think Christians in some ways sort of maybe lost their footing. I think we're, for example, at an historic low ebb of evangelistic engagement.
Wow.
30 years ago, people were going to EE classes and training in their churches how to share their faith. Today, usually when I hear someone talk about evangelism, it's almost always them sort of maybe pointing out how people did it badly rather than how we might do it rightly. So I think one of the challenges is there's some real headwinds from culture pushing against some of those things, and Christians find themselves, like I said, on the wrong side from the world's perspective of the cultural divide. So I think that's a challenge. Now you go outside of the English-speaking Western world, the situation is different. You go to the majority Muslim world, you're having a very different conversation of religious persecution, of how do you engage cultural contexts of people of Muslim or backgrounds that are shaped by their context as well. So it's a complex answer. But in the Western world, I would say that's one of the challenges. How do we help Christians regain solid footing? And I don't mean that. I think theologically, Christ is the cornerstone and the Scriptures are faithful and true. But it's more, how do we help them regain confidence in the gospel and their Christian witness? And I would also say a lot of Christians have kind of not done well with this as well. So how do we help recognize that there have been diverse ways, and not all those ways have gone well the last few years? How do we find the way? And one of the reasons I came to Biola and Talbot was I like the language you use about winsome convictions, about, I've heard Barry Corey talk about hard center and soft edges, and all those things I think resonate well. A lot of Christians right now going to war, and I don't think you can war against the world and reach the world at the same time. So I think the question is, how do we stand up? How do we stand out? How do we remain faithful on what are really difficult issues? And that kind of goes to your question too. I wrote an article, I just got an email a minute ago from Billy Wilson, the president of Oral Roberts University, one of our sister schools. Billy's a great guy. But when they were in the Sweet 16, I know nothing about sports. I had to Google what it was. But
this is a big deal.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And they also got significant pushback to say they shouldn't be allowed to compete.
That's right.
And so I wrote an article in USA Today defending them and defending biblical values and speaking about what's called the Equality Act and other things. And I got to tell you, the pushback was substantive. I mean, phone calls and angry letters and more. So you have to acknowledge that there are things that we have to stand for, but how we engage in these conversations really matters to our Christian witness. Now, Christian witness is not everything. You can't base everything you do on witness, on sharing the gospel. You can't winsome your way out of every issue, because we care about being winsome. But I think finding that balance is a real key thing in the cultural moment that we're in, and I think we're not yet figured that out fully.
One of the things that I think I've sensed just in the last few years, particularly since the Obergefell decision, is feeling like, excuse me, I'm in exile in my own state.
Totally, yeah.
In exile in my own community. And sharing the gospel as an exile is really different than sharing the gospel I like the way you put it, when you have the home field advantage.
Home field advantage, yeah.
So how would you advise folks who are in, maybe evangelicals like us who are in areas of the country that are more hostile to Christian faith than others, to share your faith well, while at the same time recognizing the landscape for what it is,
right.
Being an exile in your own community?
Yeah, it's funny. People have pointed out to me that I have made a move from the frying pan to the fire when it comes to where you live geographically. At least it's warmer here, but you're in very, like, for example,
I think it might be a warmer fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Too.
It's like when Roe v. Wade was overturned, it did nothing in Illinois or California. So we're still having to advocate in and around issues of life. We're still in the process of trying to persuade people. But what I would say is, I lived in Nashville. I'm not a Southerner, but I lived in the American South for a season. I actually was born and grew up outside of New York City. But there is a different feel. The assumption in the suburban Nashville area where I lived is that, when you move in a neighborhood, people ask, hey, you want to come to our church? When I came to Chicago, it was 2 years before somebody engaged a faith conversation with me. Now, a lot of people might have known that but 2 years before somebody started a conversation with me that was to share the gospel. I actually wrote an article about it. It was an Uber driver, Jane the Uber driver. So, and she did a great job. And so what I would say is, here we find ourselves perceived by a significant percentage of people in Illinois, California, that actually see us as part of the problem, not part of the solution. As part of what needs to be, we need to move on from, not we need to move toward. But I think the opportunity here is that, in all across the English-speaking Western world, I was just, I teach some at Wycliffe Hall at Oxford, and my course is Christianity and Contemporary Culture. And the reality is I think everybody in places like the UK or Australia or California or Illinois, and increasingly in Nashville as well, that the ideas that are driving the cultural shift are actually collapsing in on themselves. And the whole modern experiment is failing. And, if you had said 3 years ago where we would be right now in a culture, I don't think anybody would have believed it. Remember 2019 making those great, resolutions and more. But I think that part of what we have to do is also show an alternative story. So this is what it looks like when Christians, changed by the power of the gospel, live faithfully in line with the scriptures, and their lives are full and meaningful, and they're doing good works, and they see our good works and glorify our Father who's in heaven. But the way they live has proven itself out. And I think this is, and Sean, I love the work you've been doing. You engage often younger generations to really help them be strong in their faith, so they can live differently than the world around us. I think that's going to be a key future for us. So in places that are more hostile, and I you think about, I just preached a couple of months ago, by the time we're recording this, at a church in Australia, where it's called City on a Hill Church. It would be easy to Google, and the pastor there's name's Guy Mason, and a guy who became the head of a footy club, very prominent footy club in Australia. That's Australian rules football.
Yeah, there you go. Not foodie.
Yeah, that's right. Footy, right? Footy. So the guy who becomes the head of this club is the chairman of the elders of the board at this church. And people look at the doctrinal statement. The church holds views that are orthodox on issues of sexuality and more. And it's on it becomes the front page news of every newspaper in Australia. And they actually, this person gets pushed out of the job.
Wow.
So I think that we're seeing already in other parts of the English-speaking Western world where this leads, and we're trying to figure out how how to navigate that. But we start a few steps back from where it might be in Nashville, where you say, hey, do you go to church? Do you know Jesus? Here, it might be negative perceptions are the starting point. But Jesus is not done. The Holy Spirit's still at work. Right. And, I just listened to a podcast, time of this recording just yesterday, but someone I'd work with, Molly Worthern, professor of history at the University of North Carolina, talking about, and she wrote Apostles of Reason. I'm using it in a book I'm writing. And she just talked about how she just came to faith in Jesus. She in a secular environment, hearing the gospel, J.D. Greear, Tim Keller, and others, and Colin Hansen did the interview for the Gospel Coalition, and we just emailed this morning, her clear articulation of her seeing, understanding, and responding to the gospel was deeply moving. The fact that secular contexts are growing doesn't mean the gospel can't still be advancing.
Yeah.
So.
Amen to that. Now, how much of that intersects with questions of politics? Because I can only imagine in 2024, we can see the writing on the wall, how divisive and bitter and all the issues will be at play coming up. Has that been a part of your missiology in the past? What role do you anticipate playing, if anything, as the elections near?
Yeah, and it's tricky because it depends on what you mean by politics. So, for example, I wrote in that USA Today article about orthodoxy around issues of sexuality. And I specifically mentioned a bill called the Equality Act, which I believe is the greatest threat to religious liberty in our lifetime.
I agree.
So I guess the question then becomes is that political? I encourage pastors to speak up on issues of pro-life issues. I think it really matters. Yet there are laws right now being debated and being passed. I think it matters how we speak of immigrants and refugees, people made in the image of God, worthy of dignity and respect. So I think there are realities that have political ramifications. Now, in my case, when I came to Wheaton, I was the head of I just came as the head of the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center, and part of what my job was, Wheaton had this unique center. My job was just to help people engage culture. So I interviewed in 2016. I interviewed major presidential candidates. I interviewed Marco Rubio, who he happened to go to a church that I was the teaching pastor at, and Jeb Bush, Ben Carson. I mean, fascinating conversations.
Yeah.
And I think and I was a public commentator. I was at Christianity Today at the time. A couple years after that, Wheaton asked me to step into a dean role. And so I've been the dean, and depending on when this releases, I may still be the dean. I'm the dean until the end of June at Wheaton College School of Mission, Ministry, and Leadership. It did lead to a shift because it's less of a public commentator role and more of an equipping and leadership role. And now, of course, even from here, I've been a dean and a professor at Wheaton College, still head of the Billy Graham Center. But the school here is what I'd say faculty-wise 7 times larger. So I think for me, I'm more. There's different stages, and you want to be faithful to where God has placed you and the voice He's given you. I think for here, I'm going to be more focused on how do we equip Christians, because remember, for those of you who don't know, the Talbot School of Theology is also the robust undergraduate program at Biola University. Every student takes 30 hours for a Bible minor. So we want them to come out well equipped for the world that is not as friendly as it used to be.
Sure.
But then also, too, our graduate program, over 1,000 students in our seminary program and more. So for me, I think we don't need to step back from issues that the world would try to say is just politics. I don't think that issues of morality and justice and character, I don't think those are just politics. But I think they all have political dimensions. So, but my role here probably will be more equipping pastors and leaders. Talbot's asked me to, the school's asked me to still continue my speaking and writing ministry. Hopefully, by the time I start this job July 1st, I will have finished my book on the future of evangelicalism. If not, I am in trouble with Mrs. Stetzer. Yes, exactly. And then I've got another book under contract. So I'm going to continue writing and speaking. But mostly what I do is train pastors and leaders. But those things will have dimensions that the world would sometimes see as political.
So Ed, you spent a lot of time, particularly at Lifeway,
Yeah, Lifeway, 9 years at Lifeway.
In doing a lot of research on the state of the church, the state of the Bible and theology and things like that. What, as you reflect on the state of the evangelical church today, what are you encouraged about, and what are you worried about?
Yeah, so I think people need to realize that the perception of evangelicals in the corridors of power is probably negative. I talk to a lot of reporters. I work a lot with religion reporters intentionally because I want them to have an evangelical who really believes the evangelical stuff to call. And some of them are very fair. Most of them are very fair in the religion reporter world. Sometimes it's more broadly. And I think that's probably unfair. I really wish, I think there's sometimes a dismissiveness towards people of devout faith who, and what I would say is I see the tutoring programs in a small town in Alabama engaging persons coming from financially disadvantaged, marginalized communities, crossing racial, language, and ethnic barriers at a small, wonderful Pentecostal church in rural Alabama, just to use that as an example. And you go to places like that sometimes people in New York and LA, I've lived in New York and now I'm living near LA, that they might be dismissive of, call it flyover country. But those people are showing and sharing the love of Jesus in ways that really encourage me. Specifically, I would say there are 3 or 4, because I'm asked this question often in the media as well. I'm encouraged in the future of evangelicalism by Christians who are seeking to live out the truths of the gospel, its implications in their lives. And I see that all over the country. I see that all over the world. Second, I'm encouraged by the continued growth of church planting. I think church planting is now, I've written more on church revitalization than I have on church planting. But also, too, many of those church plants are engaging communities that are places you'd be shocked to see church plants. Right, so I recently did some stuff with a group in San Francisco, the Bay Area. Just these church plants proclaiming the gospel in a very secular environment and seeking to live out faithful the truths of the gospel. I would also say the beautiful increased diversity of the church. You see that in the UK. I preach at a church pretty regularly there called Kensington Temple. It's a flagship church of the Elam Pentecostal denomination. It's right in Notting Hill in London, so everyone knows the neighborhood from some movie that I didn't see. So, I go to that church, and it's 122 countries represented, men and women from every tongue, tribe, and nation in London.
It's amazing.
Or even at Moody Church. I was the interim at Moody Church for 4 years, almost 4 years, which nobody should be the interim of anything for 4 years. But anyway, I was the interim pastor at Moody Church for longer than 3 of their pastors have been the pastor of Moody Church. But 82 countries represented there. To see that just powerful is a beautiful thing. And I would say, too, fourthly, and that's my 4 things, is I'm encouraged what I see in the next generation because we're in a season of clarification. Being a Christian, which was the default position, Congress is 90-something% Christian by self-identification. Now, I don't think there's actually an ongoing spiritual revival going in Congress. People have believed that there is a cultural value with identifying with Christianity. And I think for older people like in Congress, it probably is. So you say, I'm a Christian and identify as such. That's not true for a 24-year-old today. So I think what you're seeing is for that 18-year-old, when she identifies as a Christian, there's a real seriousness to it. Whereas identifying as a Christian maybe in prior generations was something, you did because it had a cultural value. There was a cachet associated with it. So I think and again, I don't think it's good that the decline in self-identified Christianity is here. I think sometimes people, I don't think it's good. But one of the silver linings of that cloud is a greater clarity on what a Christian is and is not. And I think, so you're seeing nominalism. So nominalism is perhaps the greatest religion in English-speaking Western world. So nominalism is falling away. What's replacing it is mostly secularism, but also among the next generation of more devout faith and practice. So what we find is younger adults tend to be more serious about their faith. They hold faith at a lower level. When they do, they hold it at a higher level. So I think that's an important distinction.
Okay, so 9 years at Lifeway, 4 years at Moody, this time at Wheaton. How old are you?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
So first of all, it was not 4 years at Wheaton. I had 4 years at Moody. So I was 7 years. It's so funny because people, like I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were direct messaging on Twitter. I'll name her Sharon Hoddy Miller. I've had hosted her on podcasts. She's got a new book on kindness. So she says to me, "You were just at Wheaton such a short time," and I said, "I was 7 years at Wheaton. That's like there's time for a biblical jubilee." So I was at 9 years at Lifeway, 7 years at Wheaton. Before that, I was at the North American Mission Board as its missiologist in residence for 5 years. And then I was a seminary professor for 3 years. And then prior to that, I was a church planner. So I started, Don and I moved to the inner city of Buffalo, New York when we were 21 years old. It was the fastest shrinking city in America at the time. And we felt God call us to plant a church among the urban poor. And so most people who first read anything by Ed Stetzer read a church planning book. And so I wrote what was called, first it was called Planting New Churches in a Postmodern Age.
Of course, you had to call it that.
I didn't call it that, but it so it was a little blue book. And then language sort of shifted, and these publishers, so it was then Planting Missional Churches.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the space. I think that's part of why I love the church. So one of the things that's going to make people nervous at Talbot is every once in a while I'm going to be at a wonderful church. I sometimes tweet that I got a free Sunday. I want to come. I'll preach at a small church. If you're under 100, here's what it is. And then I'll sometimes tweet after that, I miss being a local church pastor. And it always makes people nervous at wherever I work because it doesn't mean I'm going to quit. But I think that I can't think of a more important role or job than that of the local church pastor. So anyway, that's kind
awesome.
of part of my passion is the church.
By the way, Ed, when you sent out that tweet, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks ago, one of my friends, who's probably the most influential person, one of the most influential in my son's life, one of his coaches, local pastor, small church, he's like, he called me, he goes, "You see what Ed did? I'm so glad he's at Talbot because most people don't realize how hard it is to be a small church pastor."
True.
And for somebody like Ed to step in. So I love that. I might copy that someday. Maybe I'll tag you and just offer that as well.
No, it's super great because
when my kids are gone.
You never know where you're going to end up. And so I have a rule. I put it on Facebook because, I'll say yes, but I'm going to, so if I end up at some really weird place, I'm going to preach something that maybe.
There you go.
But I've ended up at a Japanese background Presbyterian church. I've ended up at a Black missionary Baptist church. I've ended up at a couple of Pentecostal churches, Southern Baptist church. The most recently was Irvine Harvest Community Church, which is funny because I went there and I tweeted and everyone said, "Harvest isn't a small church." I said, "No, it's not that Harvest."
Yeah,
it was
a little different.
It's this wonderful church. Talbot students there. Got to meet Talbot students there.
That's fun.
And so, so I love doing that. And one of the things I want to do is, on most Sundays, not most, probably almost all Sundays, I'm preaching somewhere because I just love the church. And part of my move here is I'm teaching pastor and scholar in residence at Mariners Church, which is in Orange County. You live in Orange County. He lives in Orange County.
Yeah.
So but we're in Los Angeles County at Talbot. So I'm learning the geography, just across the border there. So I love the local church. Eric Geiger is the pastor there, and we have been close friends for 15 years. I used to be his teaching pastor in Miami when he was at a church in Miami. So we're just continuing that tradition. We served as vice presidents of Lifeway to get together. Okay. But again, 9 years at Lifeway, 7 years at Wheaton. I have not changed jobs a lot. I just wanted to get that out there.
We appreciate that. I sense you're getting this question a lot, so don't worry. Take a deep breath. We're glad to have you.
It's a thing like, I guess it feels like just a quick time at Wheaton, but 7 wonderful years.
That is awesome. That's
so we had a great time. And I love the folks at Wheaton, and I'm thankful. We saw, at the time of this recording, we just did graduation. And to see students, we had students from probably 11, 12 countries walk across that stage. It was super fun. And it felt like a kind of a nice conclusion to conclude at a graduation time. So
let me ask this.
You'll notice he did not answer your question.
I know.
It's on Wikipedia. I'm 56 years old. I don't think that's a secret. So it's always weird. You can't I don't know how people know that, but it's like on Wikipedia. So it's 56 years old. I was born on September 2nd, 1966 in Manhasset, New York at Jewish Hospital. So now you know all the specific details.
Amazing. Well, here's a tougher question for you than that one. Probably one of the hardest issues that the church has dealt with over the past few years, especially during COVID, is just polarization, division. We see it in the wider culture clearly. we see it within the church. As a missiologist and just someone who loves the local church, what's your advice how to navigate this? Because when I look at myself, I think I want to die on the right issues. And I don't know that I always do, but it's like I want to be as charitable as I can be towards people on secondary issues, die on the right ones. Yeah. What's your advice for people, given there's so much difference on racial issues, whatever the issues are?
Yeah, and I would say that one of the first things is you're just going to have to get used to the fact that no matter what you do, people are going to be happy with you. I think we had this really very nice season of maybe from 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s that were really outliers historically, where and I think a lot of this was Billy Graham's influence. Is Billy Graham?
Wow.
We kind of in still the shadow when Billy Graham sort of brought everyone together, and we could have Promise Keepers, right? And 1 million men could go in the mall and talk about issues that were actually challenging in our culture, right? It's, I think it's a little young for you to have been at that meeting, but I wonder, you might have been to a Promise Keepers thing or two.
The right age.
I went. Yeah,
you went. Okay.
As a Biola student.
He went with his dad.
He went with his dad, exactly, just to date us. But even Coach McCartney talking about issues of racial reconciliation and more, I think it really matters, still matters that we speak up on those issues. But doing that today would get you pushback from different quarters. It's a different world.
That's right.
And I think partly you have to remember that that when you're a pastor or a church leader, and you step into stuff and you use language, for example, that is language that is associated with whole movements, you may not necessarily be trying to associate with that entire movement. But then all of a sudden people are like, well, I heard my pastor use this, or I heard one of our staff use this. Is that what we mean? Is that what we believe at our church? So I think it's been a real time of sorting. I called it, I'm the editor of a magazine, general editor of a magazine called Outreach Magazine. And I wrote in there, I called it the Great Sort. So people are sorting themselves where before, well, if you go back 50 years ago, they sorted themselves theologically by denomination. So, you're an Anglican, you would go to Newtown, you look for an Anglican church, and I'm not necessarily saying this is true, but my guess is if you went to a new town, it wouldn't necessarily be, I have to be in an Anglican church. 50 years ago would be the case. 20, 30 years ago, it was, I got to be an evangelical and maybe a Pentecostal or a charismatic, Spirit-filled tradition or a different tradition. Today, increasingly, it's sorting ideologically.
That's right.
So people that we held common thing, we believe the gospel the same way. We believe Jesus died on the cross for our sins in our place. We believe the authority of Scripture, but we're speaking up on social issues in a different way. I think that's a big shift, and it's really multifaceted. I just was at the installation service of Charlie Dates at Salem Baptist Church in Chicago. If you've never been to an installation service in a historic African-American church, it is a fascinating and powerful experience. But even people in different races, ethnicities, backgrounds, and cultures are trying to figure out how to speak up on these issues and to encourage and to stay in the same faith community as people who maybe express those things differently. So what I would say is part of what we're going to have to figure out, is how we can disagree on some things that are, for example, when it comes to, we talked about politics earlier. I see Christian pastors constantly commenting on politics in a way that can become overwhelming. In ways, and I sometimes want to say, maybe that's not the place to use your voice. For example, I don't think Jesus had a preferred marginal tax rate he was really wanting to see that level. I see pastors commenting on that. Now, let me just say that the tax rate here in California is too high, so I have an opinion on that. But I would say that there are people who hold to the same view of the authority of Scripture, the need for personal conversion, who would walk with us on issues of being pro-life, caring about issues of justice, caring about how we treat people around the world and in our own communities, who really recognize that one of the great issues that face before us are issues of gender, identity, and sexuality. And I would just say that maybe we need to acknowledge that we're going to need one another more. However, I actually don't think we're going to see cultural convulsions historically we see one in the 60s here in the U.S., in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, late 1800s to early 1900s. They seem to come every 60 years, some authors have pointed out, and they seem to take a longer time to resolve then we're maybe through 3 years. Maybe it might be 6 to 8 years. Maybe we're halfway through. So I think our students and pastors and church leaders that I work with a lot are going to need reservoirs of resilience to walk through a more conflicted time.
That's a good point.
We're going to need communities of support. We're going to need to find ways to walk in commonality with people who share the same view of the gospel with us, even when we may disagree on how to address some cultural issues.
Ed, you've been in Christian higher education for 7 years at Wheaton.
Thank you. 7 years. How many years?
Seven long years at Wheaton.
7 long years.
And now you're
Thank
headed
you, Sharon
into,
Hottie Miller. 7 years.
And then you're now into this stretch, starting soon at Biola
That's right.
with Talbot as an embedded seminary within a broader Christian university. I've noticed lots of observers on the scene that's almost writing an obituary for Christian higher education. What do you see as the future for Christian higher education? And do you think that obituary is on target or premature? How do you feel about that?
Well, it's obituary might be too strong, but there's some obituaries. I mean, we're seeing Christian schools close. Sometimes moving online is a variation of that as well. I think now again, it's sort of like preaching to the choir, because I'm assuming the people who listen to this podcast believe these things, but maybe we can ask them to join us in seeing the treasure that universities, Christian colleges and universities are for. The reality is, because to see students come to a Christian college university, see their worldview line up with the scriptures. And again, I don't expect a 17-year-old to come in, with that, but to see them be challenged. One of the reasons I love the 30 hours here at Biola, to see them challenged and to be rich in the scriptures, to engage in theological understanding. I think we really need to ask the question for many Christians, even listening here, how do we advocate for the role of the Christian university? And, we care about liberal arts. We have multiple programs here. I would say there has been a pretty big shift in church practices. So if we go to now the seminary level, and just so people know, we call it, I'm the dean of the Talbot School of Theology, and that includes our undergrad and our grad. And sometimes people just say seminary, and we do have a seminary, but it's the Talbot School of Theology is the totality of that. You're undergraduate faculty, aren't you, Sean?
I'm full-time at Talbot, but I do one undergrad class.
One undergrad class. Okay, yeah. Good. So with that being said, I think the reality is, and we found this at Wheaton. So, we saw our program in 2 years double in size. And the reason we did is we wanted to stay close to the church. Now, it's much smaller than Talbot's program. So we had maybe 400 non-duplicating headcount in our program. But in the number of hours, doubled in size, because we created partnerships with, the Open Bible Churches is a wonderful Pentecostal denomination that where they send us students as well. We partnered with Propel, Christine Cain's organization, and saw over 100 women go through. And right now we have, I think, probably still 100 women doing their master's degree there. We partnered with Acts 29. We have a cohort of Acts 29 students going through this together. We have, so we intentionally ask questions like, how do we make it accessible, but it's still, Wheaton's a quality education. Talbot's a quality education.
Sure.
So what I say to them is, you might come, like they might come 3 times a year and take classes, but they're going to do all the reading and all the writing. We don't want to. Right now, there's a bit in Christian theological education. There's in some contexts a kind of a race to the bottom. Let's make it as easy, as short, and as accessible as possible. And I'm for accessibility. I'm for affordability. But I don't want to race to the bottom to do the least. I want us to, and one of the things I'm passionate about Talbot is to have the robust theological education. But the reality is, a lot of churches don't see that as important like they did 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I think by providing ways, we really want to invite students to come stay, live with us locally here at Talbot. We have a wonderful residential program. But we also have robust online program. We have other ways you can engage. I mean, the apologetics program you're in is predominantly online.
It is, yeah.
And I was just over at the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, and they were talking about the number one apologetics program in the world is over at Biola and Talbot, and I love that. So what I would say is, I don't think the obituary is written. I think undergrad is a challenging time, but you got to remember too, there's like I think I'm trying to remember if it's 1 or 2 million. It's either, I forget which one, but there's like a whole lot less students after the pandemic than the beginning.
That's right.
It's just people said, I'm not going to do it anymore. And now we're about to go into a demographic cliff that about 15, 16 years ago, people quit having kids. And I would just say that on the other side, I think Christian universities are going to emerge, I think, stronger, but it also, we're going to need the help of churches and schools. I was just on the phone with a pastor over on the other side of town here in the Southern California area. And he said to me, we just have to help our students see the value of Christian education, higher education. And so I don't think it's there, but I think we are through some tough times, and I hope our listeners will be engaged in helping to advocate for that, and know that Talbot, we're going to work to engage church spaces even more effectively than we have already, but even more effectively than we have, so that we can make education more accessible to students who maybe can't relocate. We want you, if you can, come here and be with us. But we have both options.
No, I got one last question for you about this. But first off, I just have to know, you are the first guest who's brought a desktop.
It's not a desktop.
That is a desktop.
It's a 16-inch Mac.
60-inch Mac is called a
16,
desktop.
not 60.
Oh.
It's a 16-inch Mac. And I'm sorry. Right. What is that little thing? That's like nothing.
It's got a superhero on it.
It's got a superhero. It's probably copyrighted, and you're putting it on the video. So violation of that. All right, go ahead.
Well, now that's the issue you have to deal with.
That's true. I am the dean. We need to talk about your copyright infringement. We're going to get a letter from Marvel.
So my question is, spell out for us specifically the value in theological education. So, I teach in the apologetics program, a subgroup of
let me stop
Talbot.
there. That's all I know, is that you teach in the apologetics program. And
Fair enough.
So, but you're in a subgroup of Talbot.
Well, I mean, it's one department.
Okay, it's a department at Talbot. So the apologetics program is a department, separate department at Talbot.
Yeah, it's a program within a program within
I'm
Talbot.
learning as I go. So I use these interviews to learn things. Okay.
So one of the things that I do is I push our program because I believe in it. And I tell students certain things about the value of it. So, for example, the letters after your name have a lot less value than they did. They might open up some doors, gives you some credibility, but so that helps. Yeah. The idea of just having a deadline when papers are due creates a certain level of discipline. Yeah. I go the class on evil and resurrection. I go through every paper and give very personalized feedback they can't get.
Love that.
The discussion with their other not only with the faculty at times, but with the other discussion boards interacting, there's that value. I try to lay out for people what that value is, because a lot of people think, well, Sean, I can just, instead of going to your class, you have debates on the resurrection online. I can just watch that. I can watch William Lane Craig online. I can learn all this stuff. And in the past, I'd say, well, you don't know what's reputable on the internet.
True.
Well, now you've got Wheaton and you've got Biola giving courses online. People can do free. Yeah. So what's the value for somebody to spend their time and their money getting a degree in theological education today?
Yeah, so 21 years of age, just got married at 20, finished up my undergraduate degree in biology and chemistry, Donna in education, moved to the inner city of Buffalo, New York, kind of not thinking I needed theological education. And I had taken 2 courses from a school at that time that was sort of moving away from being a Christian school. So I took 2 religion courses and quickly realized that, and I'm so thankful that people didn't record my sermons back then. But,
I feel the same.
Can you just imagine? I was terrible at times. But I quickly learned that I need to know more. That leading is a complex thing. So we talk about leadership, but also even theologically. And I was already kind of passionate about theology just as a young undergrad. It mattered to me. But what education does is it forces you, because you're forcing yourself, but it forces you to engage topics you might not normally engage. So I was very interested in early on, maybe as a new pastor, like Reformed theology. I was very interested in Reformed theology. So I could read all day long, but maybe I didn't really read a lot about maybe the Holy Spirit or maybe about apologetics or the other things. So going through a prescribed course of study, I think, is so helpful because it enables you to engage resources and writings that people who really think through these things have said these are helpful, representative ways for you to learn about theology, about the Bible. So you ought to know some things about those topics. You ought to know about theology. You ought to be able to go through what pneumatology is and what your soteriology is. And And those things are not things that you would normally just pick up a book on soteriology, but then someone's going to have a conversation with you on what do you believe about salvation and how is God at work and what does it mean that he's drawing women and men to himself. So I would say a prescribed course of study takes you on that journey. It is for some people, like sometimes, churches will be looking and they'll look for somebody and having a Bible major or something or a seminary degree will be part of it. So I think that's good. For me, it's more, I want you to be prepared, and the people at theological institutions, and you don't want to pick one that's kind of aligned with where you are, right? So because they've thought through the kind of things you need to know, and you probably haven't thought about those things in the same way that they have. And so I'm very thankful for that. So I did, I was pastoring, and so I did 2 master's degree when I was full-time pastoring in church planning. And then I did a DMin while I was full-time pastoring in church planning. And then I eventually did the PhD when I was a professor. But so I think that's a big part of it. I would say too, it is an investment, but it also when you bring that level of investment, and I've seen this with students. When we have students that aren't vested in their own education, maybe someone else is paying for it. They aren't as vested often. So when you're paying for this, you are vesting in this commitment and on this journey. And I want you to know at Talbot and at other institutions, right, that we see it as a stewardship. You're trusting us to steward your time well.
That's great.
Ed, I think this has been so helpful for us. I hope our viewers have enjoyed getting to know a bit of the new dean at Talbot School of Theology. We're looking so forward to having you come and start.
Can't wait.
And I want to encourage our viewers to be sure and keep Dr. Stetzer in your prayers as he assumes this new role as dean. Keep Talbot and Biola in your prayers as we still face challenges. The headwinds of culture are pretty strong here in California. And so we'd appreciate you all.
And what a great place to study, because you're seeing where culture could be in some of these other places in 10, 15 years as well.
Yeah, we've said to our friends in other parts of the country, this movie's coming to a theater near you.
It's true. It's true.
So we're delighted to have you spend the time with us. Thanks so much for all your insight, for the things you're passionate about. We look so forward to having your leadership at Talbot in the years to come. So thanks for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we'll see you next time.